Ancient Egypt, right. It just, I don't know, it never gets old. Pyramids, pharaohs,
Right.
all those gods. It's like they had a god for everything.
They really seem to.
But today, we're not just doing the highlight reel. We're going deep. Our listeners sent in some seriously fascinating stuff about ancient Egypt.
Yes, and looking at those, it really struck me, how much geography played a role. Like, they were dealing with a lot, just in terms of where they lived.
Right. You can't talk about ancient Egypt without talking about, like, the Nile River. It was everything for them, wasn't it?
It really was. I mean, more than just a river, it was the reason they could even exist. Imagine, a huge desert, and then this ribbon of green cutting right through it. That's the Nile Valley.
Okay, I'm picturing it. So how does a river make or break a civilization?
Well, the Nile had this thing. Every year, like clockwork, it would flood, but not like a destructive flood, more like it would deposit this super fertile silt all over the place, turned the area into, well, prime real estate for farming.
So free fertilizer delivered right to your doorstep. Sounds pretty good to me.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't just about, like, standing back and letting the river do its thing, was it? I was reading in one of the sources about water clocks and irrigation systems.
Absolutely. They were masters at, working with the water, built these complex irrigation systems, not just ditches, think like basins, dikes, the whole bit. And because timing was so crucial, they came up with water clocks.
Water clocks. What are those? Some kind of ancient alarm system?
Think of them like, timekeepers. They help them track the water levels precisely, which meant they could, distribute the water fairly amongst the farmers.
Clever. Okay, so they're not just surviving because of the Nile. They're, shaping their entire world around it.
Exactly.
Which makes you wonder, how did they view the Nile, religiously? It had to have played a part in their beliefs, right?
Oh, totally. For them, the Nile wasn't just a river. It was this central part of their whole universe. They even had a god, Hapi, specifically for the Nile's flooding.
Wait, a god for flooding? Okay, tell me more. Was he a scary god?
Not scary at all. Picture this. Hapi was usually depicted as this, well, how do I put it? A very jolly, well-fed looking fellow, often painted blue or green, for the water.
Okay, I'm kind of getting a Papa Smurf meets Poseidon vibe. Did they do anything special for this happy guy?
Oh, yeah. Every year when the flooding would happen, they'd have this huge festival to honor him. Offerings, prayers, the whole bit, hoping for a good harvest.
So it was kind of a big deal.
A big deal is an understatement.
Yeah.
Imagine even the pharaoh, who was like a god himself, would lead these ceremonies.
No way. So even the pharaoh is bowing down to the power of the Nile. That's wild. Speaking of pharaohs, though, can we talk pyramids? I mean, you can't talk ancient Egypt without those.
Absolutely. And they're way more than just fancy tombs. For the ancient Egyptians, pyramids were physical representations of the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife.
Right, because they believed that death wasn't the end. Pharaohs weren't just dying, they were becoming stars.
Right. Exactly. And the pyramids were like their launch pads to get there. Each one was like a giant transformation chamber designed to guide them on their, celestial journey.
I mean, talk about ambitious. These things were enormous.
Oh, totally. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza. It took, get this, an estimated 20 years and more than 100,000 workers to build. And it wasn't just about showing off either. It was about reflecting the pharaoh's, divine status. It was about making sure their trip to the afterlife went smoothly.
Okay, so basically they were sparing no expense, which I guess explains why they filled the pyramids with, more than just gold and jewels, right? What was the deal with all the hieroglyphics?
The hieroglyphics. Think of them like a combination guidebook and prayer book all rolled into one.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
See, those hieroglyphics weren't just decorations. They were spells, stories, hymns, all meant to help guide the pharaoh through the underworld. Appease the gods and make sure they got resurrected as a star. Every single thing in those pyramids, the chambers, the passageways, even the inscriptions had a purpose.
So it's like each pyramid was basically a giant, super complex amulet.
Exactly. They took their afterlife prep very, very seriously.
I'll say, so we've got gods, we've got the afterlife, and then there's this concept I keep seeing pop up in the research. Matt. What's that all about?
Matt is key. It's kind of a big deal.
Lay it on me.
It wasn't just an idea. It was their entire cosmic order, the balance of everything. And I mean everything.
Whoa. Okay. So not just being a good person, but maintaining the balance of the universe. That's intense. So how did that, actually work in daily life? What do they do?
Well, think about it. Matt influenced everything. Their laws, how they did justice, even their art and architecture.
Wow, so they weren't messing around.
Not even a little. They believed that even their everyday interactions, how they treated each other, all of it was connected to Maat. By keeping things in balance, by upholding truth and justice, they were basically, holding back the forces of chaos.
So kind of a cosmic responsibility.
You got it. And who do you think was the ultimate guarantor of all this cosmic order?
Let me guess. The Pharaoh.
Bingo. He wasn't just a king, oh no. He was like the link between the gods and the people, responsible for keeping Mahat in check.
So no pressure there, huh? Just
Yeah.
keep the entire universe from falling apart?
Exactly. In fact, there are even paintings and stuff from ancient Egypt showing pharaohs making offerings to Mahat.
Wait, offerings to Mahat. So she's a goddess too.
She is, often shown with this feather on her head, which, symbolizes balance and truth.
It's amazing how everything connects back together for them. The Nile, the afterlife, Mahat, it's all linked. Which makes me wonder, if it was such a successful system, how come it didn't last? Why isn't ancient Egypt still around today?
Ah, that is the question, isn't it? And it's complicated. There wasn't one big dramatic ending. It was more of a bunch of things piling up over time, both inside and outside of ancient Egypt, that wore them down.
Like I was reading about climate change and some political stuff, right?
Yeah, remember how we talked about the Nile flooding, how reliable it was? Well, even tiny changes in that cycle could cause huge problems. Too little water, drought, famine, people panicking, too much water, crops wiped out, villages gone.
So their lifeline, the thing that made them who they were, could also completely wreck them.
Exactly. And on top of that, you had other empires, their neighbors, causing trouble. Invasions, wars, the whole power struggle thing, it took its toll.
So we've got internal problems, external problems, and then even their environment could turn on them. Talk about a rough go.
Right. And let's not forget about good old-fashioned internal politics. I mean, ancient Egypt lasted for centuries, dynasties changed, new pharaohs came and went, and each time, there was a chance for things to get messy.
So it wasn't like one big dramatic ending, but more like things slowly unraveling until they couldn't hold it together anymore.
Pretty much. It really makes you think about, the things we're dealing with today, right?
It does. But hey, even with all that, ancient Egypt was around for a really long time.
That's the thing. Despite all those challenges, they were incredibly resilient, constantly adapting, coming up with new ideas and solutions. I mean, you got to hand it to them.
For sure. It makes all their achievements even more impressive, right? And we've only scratched the surface here. We've got pyramids acting as celestial gateways, the Nile, which is both their best friend and their biggest threat, and Mahat, which is this whole other level of order.
Don't forget Hapi.
Right, Hapi, our flood god buddy. But we're not done yet. There's still so much to explore.
Oh yeah, there are definitely more hidden chambers to uncover.
Exactly. And up next, we're going beyond the monuments and the pharaohs. It's time to find out what life was like for, everyone else. What was it like to be an ordinary person in this incredible civilization? Stay tuned.
It's huge. Maat wasn't just, a suggestion or something. It was the cosmic order, the balance of the entire universe. And get this, it wasn't just about the big things, it was everything.
Okay, I'm officially intrigued. So how did they actually put this Maat thing into practice?
It touched every single thing they did. Their laws, their justice system, even their art and the buildings they made.
Wow, so they really lived it.
Totally. They believed that even how they interacted with each other, their daily life, all of that was connected to Maat. By living in harmony with each other and the universe, by always choosing truth and justice, they were keeping the forces of chaos in check.
So basically, they saw it as their duty to make sure everything stayed balanced, even in their everyday lives.
You got it. And, you won't be surprised to hear who they thought was ultimately responsible for making sure all of this cosmic order stayed, orderly.
Okay, let me guess. The Pharaoh.
Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner. He wasn't just a king. He was the connection point between the gods and the people. And it was his job to keep Maat in balance.
Talk about pressure. Keeping the entire universe from falling apart.
Right. They even have all these, paintings and carvings showing pharaohs making offerings to Maat.
Hold on, offerings to Maat? Was she a goddess too?
Oh yeah, usually depicted with a feather on her head as a symbol of balance and truth.
This is so cool. It's amazing how everything we've talked about links together. The Nile, the afterlife, man, it all fits. Which I gotta say makes me wonder even more, if this system was so great, so successful, how come it didn't stick around? Why isn't ancient Egypt still a thing?
The million-dollar question, right?
Okay.
It's a big one. And unfortunately, there's no simple answer. It's not like something dramatic happened that just ended it all at once. It was more like a whole bunch of factors, both internal and external. Things just kind of piled up over time, and eventually it all became too much.
Like what kinds of things? I know I was reading about climate change being a factor and some political upheaval too, right?
You got it. Remember how we were talking about the Nile flooding and how reliable it was? Well, even small changes in that cycle could spell disaster. Like if the floods were too low, that meant drought, famine, total chaos. Too high. Entire crops wiped out, villages gone, you name it.
Wow, so the same thing that gave them life could also completely destroy everything. Talk about a double-edged sword.
Right. And to make matters worse, they've got other empires on their borders causing problems, invasions, wars, the usual power struggles. All of that takes its toll.
So internal problems, external problems, and even Mother Nature could turn on them at any moment. That's a lot to deal with.
Tell me about it. And then, we can't forget good old internal politics. Ancient Egypt was around for a really long time. Dynasties changed. New pharaohs came to power, and each time that happened, well, there was always potential for things to get a little messy.
Yeah, that's fair. So basically, it was less of a sudden collapse and more of a gradual unraveling, like things slowly but surely falling apart until they just couldn't hold it together anymore.
Pretty much. It really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? I mean, it makes you think about the challenges we face today.
It does. But even with all those challenges, it's incredible how long ancient Egypt actually lasted. They were resilient.
Totally. I mean, think about it. Even with all those challenges, they still thrived for centuries. They were constantly adapting, finding new ways to do things, new solutions to problems. You have to admire that kind of ingenuity.
For sure. If anything, it makes all of their accomplishments even more impressive, right?
Right.
And we've only just scratched the surface here. We've got pyramids acting like cosmic gateways to the afterlife, the Nile, which was both their best friend and their worst enemy, and then Ma'at, which is this whole other level of thinking about cosmic order and balance.
And don't forget Hapi, our friendly neighborhood flood god.
Right. Happy, can't forget Happily Be. But we're not done yet. There's still so much more to explore.
Oh, absolutely. There are always more hidden chambers to uncover, right?
Exactly. And in our final act, we're going beyond the monuments, beyond the pharaohs, and really trying to understand what life was like for, well, everyone else. What was it like to be just a regular person living in this amazing civilization? Stick around to find out. We've been on quite a journey, haven't we? Unpacking ancient Egypt, all its complexities.
We have. It's a civilization that keeps on giving,
Yeah.
Layers upon layers.
We've gone deep. Pyramids, the Nile, even this whole concept of cosmic order with Ma'at.
Right. But we can't forget, at the heart of it all, we're people just like us.
Exactly. Our listeners sent in so much great stuff about, like, the everyday lives of Egyptians, what it was actually like to live back then. Ready to dig into that a bit?
Absolutely. Let's trade those pharaohs and pyramids for, well, how did most Egyptians actually experience their world?
I like it. So no more golden tombs. What do we have instead?
Imagine this. Sun's coming up over the Nile. You're not a pharaoh, but, maybe you're a farmer, an artisan, a merchant. Your life, it revolves around that river, the seasons changing, and that cycle of life and death we were talking about earlier.
It's so easy to get caught up in, like, the grandeur of it all, the monuments and the pharaohs.
Yeah, it really is. But for the majority of Egyptians, life was about, well, hard work, being resourceful, and a really strong sense of spirituality.
Makes sense. So give me an example. What was it like to be, say, a farmer back then?
Well, picture this. Your entire livelihood depends on the Nile flooding, right? So you're working your tail off to prepare the fields, get those crops planted, and you're praying like crazy to Happy for a good harvest.
Right. Happy, our flood god buddy. It's like a direct connection, not just to the land, but to the divine too.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got farming, but what about life beyond the fields? What else filled their days?
Well, imagine, lively marketplaces, right? Smells like spices, people are haggling over prices, you've got artisans, real masters at what they do, turning clay into pottery, copper into tools, even making beautiful jewelry out of gold.
Sounds pretty lively. What about families? What was family life like for them?
Family was huge. They were super close-knit, often living in homes with multiple generations. Kids would be playing with, toys made of reeds, little toy chariots, learning the family trade, passing down traditions and all that.
It's amazing how these little details, they make ancient Egypt feel so much more relatable. Like, yeah, their lives were different, but they were still just people trying to live to raise families.
Totally. And while, on the surface it seems like their lives were worlds apart from ours, they had the same hopes, the same worries, the same dreams, right?
They celebrated when a new baby was born, mourned when they lost someone, and just tried to find meaning in a world that could be, well, pretty unpredictable.
Just like us, they were figuring it out, finding joy where they could, building a life.
And don't forget, they loved their art, music, storytelling. It wasn't all just about surviving. They made time for beauty, for fun, for connection.
Okay, so paint me a picture. What kind of stuff did they enjoy?
Think like music with drums and flutes, dancing, telling stories about their gods and heroes. They even decorated their walls with these amazing murals, scenes from daily life, from the afterlife, you name it. It's like they were reminding themselves, even with all the hardships, even with this whole vast universe out there, that there's still beauty to be found, connections to be made. Don't forget to enjoy the simple things,
And that's the thing that I find so amazing about ancient Egypt. It wasn't just about pyramids and power and pharaohs. It's this testament to, well, to the human spirit, our ability to find meaning, to make something beautiful, to build a community even when things feel uncertain.
It really has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
And, our listeners, they really brought it this time. So much fascinating stuff to explore. We've learned so much, not just about ancient Egypt, but about ourselves, I think.
I agree.
So next time you see a picture of a pyramid or hear about some pharaoh, remember the people, the everyday Egyptians living their lives, loving their families. They're a part of that legacy too.
They are.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep diving deep.